Welcome to Fightline, brought to you in conjunction with Buy My Fight and Westbound Logistics Services. My name is Ben Doughty, and the format of the show at this extraordinary time is that I go grope in the far reaches of the internet for some semblance of a current boxing story for which to discuss at the start of the show. Looking at the various news sources today, I note that recently deposed, almost undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Andy Ruiz Jr., is keen on teaming up with Saul Canelo Alvarez's trainer Eddie Reynoso, having split up officially now with Manny Robles in the wake of his defeat to Anthony Joshua at the tail end of last year. It's an interesting scenario with Ruiz insofar as clearly he was underrated going into his June the 1st long shot challenge to Anthony Joshua at Madison Square Garden, but I do think he was conceivably a little overrated in the wake of his sensational upset, with various friends of mine in particular perhaps starved of a truly definitive heavyweight champion who seemed to be confusing Ruiz with some kind of reincarnation of Joe Frazier and Rocky Marciano. We've discussed it at length, the issues of the newfound fame and immediate wealth, which took Ruiz's eye off the ball inevitably, the party and the money, the women, the status, etc. And the fact that he came in for the rematch at 283 pounds, and history will show he didn't perform fantastically out of his skin that night. It will be interesting to see how Ruiz rebounds from this, if at all. Will there be a second act to Andy Ruiz's career, or will he be confined to the relative obscurity, albeit nobody being able to take away his peculiar niche in history? The attention was reciprocated from Eddie Reynoso, who said it would be an honour to work with the first heavyweight champion of Mexican descent. So we'll watch that story and see how that develops. Clearly the bigger question right now is at what point big time boxing or sports or entertainment will return anywhere in the world. We saw yesterday, as expected, that the so-called lockdown in the UK, which is actually a rather benevolent, be careful and make sure you keep apart from each other and don't go out unless you have to, typical British restrained regime. But when it comes to the question of when we will see big events return anywhere globally, Rick Glazer, a pundit in the United States, who some of you may know particularly from the strength of the Facebook page, was saying just the other day that all the power brokers he's been talking to have been postulating and perhaps planning a return to big time boxing behind closed doors in a suitable venue with no live admittance. That's an interesting scenario. It's something that, before we dismiss it out of hand, we should recognise the fact that these times are quite unprecedented, certainly in living memory, and we should not be too surprised what outlandish measures people may resort to in some kind of pursuit of the trappings of normal life, particularly when it comes to entertainment and sports. I would think the model could work insofar as the live gate revenue has not been the crucial thing in boxing for many decades. Since the era of Rocky Marciano in the 1950s, it was about the TV revenue, which grew into the closed circuit revenue and ran in tandem with, which from the 90s, 80s onwards became about the pay-per-view revenue. So I don't think there's any question that fights could be staged behind closed doors, as it were. The thing that gives me serious pause about this is it safe for people to be mixing and in close contact with each other, or is it not? Are we talking about a time when it's okay, the referee has to get involved? Boxing is the least social distancing concept I can think of. It's intimate, unless, rare exceptions aside, perhaps like the Johnny Nelson Carlos de Leon fight in 1990. But generally, boxers do kind of get involved and quite close to each other. The referee does that, the cornermen do that. Fighters are going to need camps. Perhaps they could operate with a relative skeleton staff compared to some of the hangers-on that some fighters generate in their camp. But people are going to need to have that intimacy in camp and on the night. At the risk of not bringing you anything particularly by way of denouement, I think we shall have to wait and see. Behind me is the most iconic and famous boxing photograph in history. It relates to what transpired on May the 25th at an ice hockey rink in Lewiston, Maine, and to this day is shrouded in controversy, rumour and mystery. I've never really been able to get to join in the kind of mass fervour and adulation for this photograph. You will see it at almost every gym and in every boxing related bar, and it's absolutely ubiquitous. It is a great picture, but I've never been able to to avoid my mixed feelings about it, because for many years I thought the fight was a fix, as many people have believed. Perhaps I was influenced by my late father, who just simply couldn't believe that it was real. You've all seen the fight and the apparently innocuous nature of the so-called phantom punch, which some do argue was one of those punches that was a lot more powerful and devastating than it looked. It was something that Liston was coming onto, and it was a short punch where Ali got the extra impact of twisting his hand. Some people called it the anchor punch, but Ali, always a showman and a raconteur, said that it was taught to him by a comedian called Stephen Fetchit, which does seem a rather bizarre version of events. But the rumours are legion about this fight. Some say that Sonny took a dive because he was in league with the mob who wanted him to exit in that fashion. Others say that he was threatened by the Nation of Islam, the so-called black Muslims, and told if he were to win the rematch, then he was a dead man. At no point do I think Ali was complicit in any kind of fix, as he said, I don't know nothing about no fix. Could nobody fix, put no fix on before the eyes of the world like that. But it was recently, while in lockdown, reading through my suite of old Boxing Illustrated and Ring magazines in moments of idleness at this time, and I came upon an interesting new alternative theory to explain the knockout that many people thought resulted from a punch that simply wasn't hard enough to knock out a man like Sonny Liston with his proven durability. This here in front of me is the September 1965 issue of Boxing Illustrated, as you can see, with Muhammad Ali, newly named at that time, and Floyd Patterson on the cover ahead of their fight. Inside, in the editorial, the publisher, Abe Glick, who is commenting incidentally on a story that the New York Senate in Albany actually voted narrowly at the time by only a margin of 29-27 to defeat a bill that would have outlawed boxing in the state of New York, and it was something which the Senate leader said he had been in favour of a banning of boxing in New York, and he said because it says it was the Clay Liston fight and the farce that unfolded that had crystallised my feelings on this matter. So that's a fascinating thing to contemplate today, is that the fight, amongst other murky influences around professional boxing at the time, nearly led to an out-and-out ban on boxing in one of the fight capitals of the world, in New York City. But as we press on, in defence of boxing and in defence of the fight, Abe Glick says as following. He says, "We were at ringside on the other side where the punch was visible, and what's more, we've got sequence action films to prove it. Furthermore, and this is the significant bit that I would like to draw your attention to, we too watched TV replays, and we clearly and distinctly saw a terrific right to Liston's jaw previous to the so-called phantom punch." Let's get this, talking to the phantom punch, let's get the backdrop back. I'm sorry about the rough and ready nature of this. I've apologised before, but I'm running in my own crib here and I don't have the guys at the studio to help me out. So let me reiterate that while the backdrop is there. We saw clearly and distinctly a terrific right to Liston's jaw previous to the so-called phantom punch. Now, in support of his argument and assertion, Glick goes on to quote Arthur Daly, wonderful name, of the New York Times, who was reporting ringside for that journal on the night, who said, "It isn't the knockout punch that sticks in the mind as much as the punch he let go a few moments earlier. It was a right to Liston's jaw and it was a beauty. It shook him to his shoe tops. For all we know, it could have been the one that set up the knockout. You might call it the delayed action. When anyone is as old as Liston must be, because nobody knew how old Sonny was, right? He's liable to fall apart without warning." This interests me because it's the first time I'm aware, although other people may have heard it, that there was this alternative theory espoused, which is not sensational and not steeped in gangster intrigue. A simple case that Liston was softened up and essentially taken out or set up for the kill by a hard right hand that landed a little while before the conclusive punch.
Remember, we're looking for a solid right hand that Ali lands before the final punch. Liston falls at a distance with a jab. Ali continues to dance. Hasn't done anything of significance so far. Feints. Liston misses with a ponderous right hand. There goes a shuffle. Ali slips a jab. Liston's not getting near to Ali at this stage. Nothing solid has landed from either fighter. Okay, there we go.
I'm guessing that Abe Glick and Arthur Daly refer to that right hand that was landed at the 107 mark of the round. As you can see there, Ali has a little touch of a left jab to the body and throws a right hand over the top of it. It does connect. Does it look hard and concussive enough to you to have put Liston in a situation where it was all over by the shouting? I'm not convinced. I thought it was an interesting theory and something that I hadn't heard before, worthy of investigation, but ultimately I don't think it brings us any closer to solving the mystery. Liston incidentally hit the mat at 142 of the round after all the controversy and what many saw as a legendary mishandling of the situation by referee former world heavyweight champion Judge Joe Walcott. The fight was finally called off after the famous intervention of Ring Magazine editor Knight Fleischer at 2:12. Another theory that's been proffered to me recently, which is closest to the one I'm prepared to accept, is that it was a legitimate knockdown and that Liston was caught coming in. His head did snap back. He was momentarily stunned, but he certainly wasn't sufficiently concussed or hurt that he couldn't continue. And it was just that he was unwilling to continue and decided to toss the whole charade in there and then with his disillusionment, his lack of desire, mob influence, so-called threats from members of the Nation of Islam. Let's not forget as well, it was also thought at the time that Ali was under threat of assassination, perhaps in that very ring, for angry followers of Malcolm X who wanted to avenge Malcolm's slaying by killing a famous new Nation of Islam figure and poster boy. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody had some telescopic sight zeroed in on one of my opponents, I wouldn't want to fight the guy either. Inevitably, whatever the truth may be, Sonny Liston certainly took it to his grave. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed episode 17 of Fightline. My name is Ben Doughty. Be lucky and keep punching.